Hi, I'm Dennis Washington from Cross Digital and CrossDig.com. Hope you're having a great day today. I got a fantastic podcast interview for you. This is with Mark Phillips. You may not have heard of him, but this guy is really, really cool. When I first read his bio, I was like, okay, this I'm not so sure, but came highly recommended from a friend of mine. Previous podcast interview on here with Brett Carter. You remember Brett? We talked just a few months ago with him. Brett suggested I talk to Mark. Mark is basically an audio engineer, but not your traditional audio engineer that runs an audio board. He's more in the whole design and the math concept of improving the audio technology that we use and things like smartphones and so forth. He's got an engineering degree in engineer physics from Cornell University. He's also got an electrical engineering degree from Stanford. He's currently working for a company called Audience, and they're creating software to make phone calls sound clearer with less echo. And we get into that as well. But he's done a lot of things. His company's spread out all over the area. We talk about that about halfway into the interview here, about the challenges of working remotely. You know, he's the only employee of his company in his state. All of his other employees are around the country. So the challenges of that, the challenges that people face if they want to quit their cubicle and move into this world of working from home, working remotely, the pros and cons of that. And if you're considering that, what you need to consider, and if your business is considering that, what you need to consider when starting to look for employees, because not everybody's a fit for this. There are some people that just really need to be around other people face to face and would not work well in a remote environment like that. So we touch on some of that. The fascinating stuff about the internet and delivery of music, how it's changed, how the internet has dramatically changed the way that the music industry operates. A lot of great stuff. So without further ado, let's get right here to the interview with Mark Phillips. And joining me now on the CrossDig.com podcast is Mark Phillips, who, as I mentioned in the introduction, basically just your average audio guru, but there's nothing average about it. It's certainly a pleasure to have you, Mark. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell folks a little bit about, when we talk about audio engineering and things like that, some people may not completely understand that. So kind of give people an idea about your background and how you got to what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, my attraction to audio is both left brain and right brain. On one hand, I'm kind of an engine nerd, and I work on the math associated with audio and improving audio or affecting audio or manipulating audio in some way. And so that's programming and math. But on the other hand, I've loved making music since I was small, and it's been a hobby for me that has grown into a pretty large hobby. I'd call it a side business, but the financials involved mean it's something mainly I do just for pleasure.
Sure. And when people start to think about audio, I mean, a lot of folks just think about these headphones and just enjoying the music and all. But as I was, we've talked earlier and reading through some of your notes, there's a lot of science and in your case even math that's involved in making audio better. To kind of give people an overview of how all that works.
Sure. And as you can imagine, it will vary wildly. But let's start with a simple example. Say you've got an MP3 player or a stereo, and there's a volume knob on it. Well, that music came off a CD or an MP3. It's represented as a digital signal, a stream of numbers. And so for a volume knob, maybe it's just as simple as multiplying that stream by 1/2, or maybe you turn it down more to 1/4. And so that's a very simple example. But from there, maybe we go to like an equalizer. You want to bring the bass or the treble up. And so you have to design what's called a filter to affect just certain frequency ranges. And then from there, we can go farther still. Say you're trying to make voice sound really good on a phone when you're in a noisy situation. Right. And you've got to pull the noise out while leaving the voice intact. Much harder. And so that's something at my current company where, we have a whole team of PhDs that work on that.
And I would guess, too, there are some situations that just you can never perfect. I mean, you get in a loud situation at a stadium or in a subway or whatever the case may be, and there are some scenarios where someone using a smartphone as a speaker in a loud area, there's just no way to get it perfect. But having said that, if you're like me, you're always trying to reach perfection.
Yeah, that's certainly true. There's lots of work to do there. I'm sure you're familiar with the artifacts that you may hear when talking to people, and the voice may sound choppy or metallic or echoey.
Right.
So there's a lot of room for improvement there in those situations, and we're getting to the point where we can handle noisier and noisier situations. But there's always surprises. Like for example, most people use a cell phone like this, right?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
now speakerphones becoming more and more common, and so it's out in front of them.
Yeah.
Well, now the noise is louder, relatively speaking. And then
True.
what if I've seen people that talk to their phones like this, they're walking or like this, and
True.
so you have to make it more and more flexible, and the situations are always more complicated as people's expectations rise. So there's plenty of work to do, but you're right, there are some situations that are just fundamentally, basically impossible
Yeah.
to.
Well, and then too, you do manage to get something perfected on one device, and someone goes and builds something new, and now you've got a completely new device
That's right.
that you're trying to solve problems on there. So I guess
That's
the
right.
work never really ends in that regard as well.
No, you're exactly right. A lot of phones have one microphone. You can do better with two microphones. That helps you distinguish noise from speech. But there are phones coming out that'll have four microphones someday.
Wow.
So, yeah,
That's amazing. Hey, one of the things I was looking at through the notes on you've touched on a variety of things in your career and so forth, but this process, and for folks that were listening in the introduction, I mentioned that, not only do you work your day job with that, but you also produce music and the left brain, right brain, like you mentioned as well. But the whole concept of delivering music, and one thing in your notes to me, you mentioned this interconnected digital highway and how that has changed music production and delivery. Kind of explain that, what you mean by that.
yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So originally, the highway to music was the road to your local Walmart, and you would go and get your CD, or for maybe some of the older folks, it would have been an LP or an 8-track, right?
Right.
And so, it was, and you'd go to people's houses, and you see these huge stacks of CDs, and music was something that you acquired and you listened to repeatedly, or maybe you just listened to the radio all the time. But some things changed, and well, before I go on to what changed, let me tell from the producer's point of view. If you had music and you wanted to get it out there, you would have to go and have a minimum of 1,000 CDs manufactured for anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 and up. And so that was really hard to get your music out there. Okay, well, then comes the internet. Well, and in the middle there, we also had CD burners, and so a lot of people started getting their music that way too, which is a problem and a whole discussion in of itself. But okay, so now the software's getting better, and now you're connected to people through email. There's new compact forms for storing music, MP3s or AAC, and so now you have a lot of options for distribution. And in fact, you'll see. You remember probably a few years ago, MySpace was a big thing,
Yep.
and it still exists, mainly just as kind of a band marketing tool. That's kind of its primary function nowadays. But then, of course, there's Facebook and all these. So the good news, if you're making music, is you can get it out to people you never would have met. You don't have to put your CD in a store. You can create a web page. You can advertise it on Facebook, etc. And the software makes it easier to make music. So there's so many options now for getting your music out there. However, there's a drawback to this too. Drawback number one is, because everybody can get their music out there, you have a lot of so-so music out there, and it becomes really hard to find the good stuff. So even if you're making good music, people may never find your music among the mess.
Yeah.
And then there's one other problem, and that is, over time, music has become more and more of what looks like a free resource. I mean, we have like Spotify and Rhapsody and other ways of streaming music, and it seems free. In reality, you have to watch some advertisements, or there's a catch of some sort.
Right.
But more and more people just perceive music as being free, which makes it increasingly difficult for people who make music to monetize their music.
When and one other thing, I mean, certainly the music industry is not alone in the whole noise factor, and I've seen this in a lot of industries, a lot of brands trying to use content marketing, brand journalism to set themselves above the noise of their competition and so forth. So I know the music industry is not alone in this, but do you find that it is harder for, now that the internet has brought so many artists and made kind of created this playing field that all of them can play in, is it hard for some of them to get above the noise than maybe in other industries? Is it harder for music artists to do that?
I think so. Maybe because it seems so ubiquitous now as far as the music, and maybe because a lot of people making music and getting out there don't have a lot of the skills necessary for marketing themselves. As you would certainly be able to tell your listeners, those skills are critical, right?
Right.
So yes, I think it's hard to market yourself, and there's just so much music out there, and you couldn't listen to it in 100 lifetimes. There's so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do think that it may be more challenging than in some other areas.
From and I mean, I guess this goes back to where your music labels, your publishers are still having to sort through the noise. I guess now the music, though, they're sorting through the noise digitally instead of people walking in their office with records and CDs for them to listen to. But do you find that the importance of those music labels and the publishers, are they still as important as they used to be? Because has their level of importance changed because of the internet?
You know, I one major thing that has changed because of the internet is it's no longer a select few providers of services like that. There's not like the big five or however many record industries. There's a lot more independent ones.
Yeah.
But as you allude to, having a label, having a someone to publicize what you're doing that's skilled in that and has the resources and connections to do it, that still holds value. And in fact, a lot of us that are just making music and putting it out there, if we were real serious about doing this as a career, there's at some point where, assuming our content is good enough, we need to align ourselves with some platform, some resource that can help get it out there so that it is noticed above the noise.
Right. And the noise is that's one of the things that when I talk with clients of my own that have no relation to the music industry at all, but it seems like every business wants to get above the noise, and they're looking for that magic solution, the magic pill that can all of a sudden they click a button, flip a switch or whatever, and all of a sudden they're getting noticed of beyond everyone else. And I hear people talking about social media, and you alluded to this as well, the ability to really get your name out there and get some exposure on the internet for a much, much smaller cost than what you used to need to do, before the internet. But having said that, even at a lower cost, are these independent music artists and the independent labels, are they effectively being able to make some hay with much lower investments?
Yes, I think the situation for independent music makers is certainly better than it was 15 years ago, and probably 10 years ago as well. There are a lot more independent music makers doing well, and some people are even doing well completely on their own, but they've been very creative. Like, for example, one lady who was making her own independent music and started to do fairly well. She released her financials open to the public so everybody could see how much she made, and this was actually endearing to her fans.
Wow.
And she got additional support through this, and a lot of people will give their music away, and then they'll make money through touring and merchandise. And for example, one thing I've tried to do in this area is, I have a music CD of kids songs, and I customize it for your family's kids. So, and I haven't done this yet, but I've been toying with the idea of giving that away. Mm-hmm. This something that's useful in the hopes of enticing them to pursue something additional that I could then monetize.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was one of the things I was looking through your notes here about in the website, by the way, drobvious.com, and I'll put that in our show notes on the blog as well. But, from a personal perspective with that and being able to customize, because I've talked to people, especially, you start looking at things like in the apparel industry, and the ability to get customized T-shirts that have your initials on them, monogrammed and so forth. That's a really, really big trend right now. Do you see the same kind of trend happening with other things like with music where people like that customized effect to that?
I think so. Music is interesting because there's all sorts of psychology involved. On one hand, kids love to hear their names in a song, right? Yeah. But when you get up to be a teenager, you're also concerned about, well, does my friend like this song too? So that might be something that's kind of anti-custom. But at the same time, they're going to want their services custom. Like, for example, Beats Audio right now, it's a new music service that's publicizing heavily. And kind of like Pandora and some other services in the past, you customize your music feed by what feel you want or what mood you're in. And so, in that sense, the service is customized, and that is very important to the customer.
And I would guess, when you start to talk about getting, you mentioned this earlier about this feel that of music being free to some degree and feel like that you don't really have to pay money to get something. At some point, the threshold you reach where, okay, if you want this customized feed based on your mood, then that's going to cost you 99 cents a month or something like that. That's where the threshold, you cross that threshold into being able to generate some revenue for a company like that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I see, I certainly see that with, when we talk about music distribution and so forth. Where do you see the future of that going? I mean, I guess 20 years ago, people really couldn't think, I guess, maybe that the internet was going to become what it is now. Now that we're immersed in this internet, is there something else down the road that 20 years from now we can't imagine we didn't have today?
Well, let's see. I'll answer that in two ways. The first I'll say is I'm happy to see that there is a move back to higher quality music. Originally, the internet, the bandwidth, and everybody's individual bandwidth of being able to pull a lot of data down was limited, and so we really compressed the music, and that that there was people dealt with the quality loss. But we're getting away from that. We're getting back to higher quality music formats, and so that's a good thing. And I think that'll continue as we move to the future. And one other thing I think I can predict is that we'll continue to have an extreme variety of music, which is a good thing. You may not get it on the radio stations, but you can get that certainly through a lot of these music services. As far as any huge shift over the next 20 years, if I could answer that question, well, that'd be $1 million question.
It would be great to be able to telegraph that.
Yeah.
One of the other things I wanted to talk to you today about, because there's a variety of things we could stay on, and there's certainly some good information there, but the challenges of working remotely, and I know you have experienced some of this in your life. I've certainly done this too. The internet has certainly changed the way that not only we communicate, but the ability to do the work that we do. Tell us a little bit about the importance of that nonverbal communication when you don't have everybody in the office. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's challenging, and I think it's a matter of trying to minimize the trade-offs involved. I'm currently the only person on my team in this state, and so I fly into headquarters sometimes, but the rest of my team is usually remote, and so I'm reduced to I can't do face-to-face, so I've got email or messaging or maybe some sort of video conferencing or phone calls. And so a lot of those, you lose out on the nonverbal communication. So say you're in a meeting and you're throwing out a new idea. I want to pursue this. Not everybody on the other side there is the type of person that speaks up immediately.
Right.
If you can see everybody, you might be able to see that person's hesitating and be able to say, well, do you have a concern about that, and follow up on that. But without that visual, you miss out on that. Or maybe even just someone's being sarcastic.
Yeah.
How do you know they're being sarcastic if you don't see their face, right?
Right.
And so, yeah. So video, if you can do video conferencing and see the other person, that helps with all this. But then you've got about a dozen other challenges. You've got the fact that usually somebody on the other side has to remember to turn on the laptop and run Skype. Or maybe if you want to see somebody other than whoever's just sitting by the laptop, then they need to have a remote camera installed. And then they need to remember that the microphone needs to be placed in a central position so you can hear everybody, and then you still may not be able to hear everybody.
Right.
And then on top of all that, if more than one person is talking at the same time, suddenly you lose your ability because you don't have a stereo representation of the whole room. You can't pick individual people out, and suddenly you don't know what's going on.
There are certainly a lot of challenges, and you're right. I've been in those. I imagine a lot of us have been in those meetings where communication really slows even in a situation like that, because we can communicate much faster person to person, in person, than we can remotely across the internet or a phone or whatever the case may be. Having said all of that, do you find that it's better for a business still to try to deal with those challenges and those limitations? Do you think they can still be more effective and efficient working remotely as a team? Or does it overall, is it going to be a long-term problem that really is going to slow the business down?
So I think it's a trade-off. I think, like in certain fields, you the most important thing is to hire people that can get the job done well, can work as a team. And so there's a hit in working remotely. It's a hurdle, but it's a hurdle that can be crossed. And so if you're willing to tackle that, there's some people that they're not going to relocate to where you are. You need to grab that talent and be flexible. And certainly, like, there are challenges, like I mentioned, but there are also all these ways that people are able to interact remotely. And a lot of these are being used within an office anyway. I mean, think about email. Every sizable business is using tons of email. So whether you're in another state or just a few cubes down the hall,
Right.
there's not much difference there.
That's a really good point. And you alluded to what I think is one of the biggest points about all of this, and really, I guess it just maybe is underscored when you've got an environment of a team that is scattered around the country, around the world, is getting the right people. Not everybody is got the genetics or the genes or whatever to be able to start their own business. Not everybody's got the ability to be self-motivated and work from home with another team and be able to overcome individually. They need to be around people all the time.
Yep.
So it's getting the right people, and I've talked about this a lot with my blog as well, and with my business, about the idea of getting the right people on the bus and getting the wrong people off the bus.
Yeah.
I really think that you make a great point there. With it's just even more important when you start dealing with companies that are connected, interconnected nationally or globally. Is that
Yep.
is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you need to not be naive about the challenges involved of working with people remotely, and then you need to make sure that you are working with people who are willing to meet those challenges. Once you've covered those bases, then being able to hire people remotely, it opens up the field. You're more likely to be able to find the talent you need, assuming you're aware of those challenges.
Yeah. If someone was unhappy in their current work environment, they don't like the cubes anymore, and they're wanting to go and work from home, and look for that job where they can work remotely with another business or whatever, what kind of advice would you give them, or how would you go about kind of looking to say, okay, you've got the skill set to do this and you don't? What kind of personality traits are you looking for that person that can do that remote job very well?
Sure, I think that's a great question. Let's break it down into things that the person needs to have to work remotely, and then also what the company, the host, needs to have.
Okay.
So the person, I think you alluded to this, I think they need to be self-motivated and be able to self-regulate, to be disciplined. I think they also need to be good communicators. If they're not good with writing thorough emails, or if they're scared to call somebody and just, this isn't working on email, I just need to call and talk to you for a while.
Right.
If they're hesitant about that, then probably not ideal. And maybe someone who's just starting in the workforce, probably not the best environment to be shepherded, to be mentored in an environment where you're going to gain the skills as quickly as would be desired. So I think that's what the individual needs to have. As far as, if you're looking to work for a company and you think that you have the right credentials, what about the company? Well, obviously, if they're not doing it with anybody else, it's going to be a little rough at first, and you need to make sure. Like, for example, a lot of our meetings, and this is at multiple companies, a lot of the meetings start 5 minutes late because people are like, "Oh, I needed to set up the laptop, and I need to do this, and oh, I forgot about Mark. Where's Mark?" And
Yeah.
so they also have to show a willingness to, go the little extra distance to have things set up right and to make that work fluidly.
Totally agree with that. Those are some really, really good points. even the simple thing like, the kid coming out of college, this may not be the perfect job for you yet, because
Right.
you do need that mentoring that you can only really get you can get that remotely, but not to the level that you might need it as you can face to face with someone. So
Yeah, that's right.
that's great stuff there. Just the remaining minutes we've got here, tell us a little bit about what you're working on, what some of the big plans are with your company, and the other projects and hobbies you've got going on as well. What's coming up in the next 6 to 12 months for you that you're excited about?
Well, let's see. On my day job side of things, one of the things my company's working on is a sensor hub, and what that is these smartphones have so many sophisticated sensors in them. They've got gyroscopes and accelerometers, and some of them can tell the temperature. And if you use all this information, if you integrate it, you can make the phone a lot smarter. Like, for example, by integrating all these sensors and looking at them, maybe the software on the phone realizes, oh, he's in the car right now because of how fast it's moving or how constantly it's moving, and so I'm going to tailor the sound setup to be ideal for a car.
Oh, wow.
Just one example. But also, we sell chips to other companies, and so if we can integrate this all into a little chip that just barely uses any power, so you get long battery life, then we can provide something that would benefit their products. And so that's one of the exciting things that my company Audience is doing.
Awesome.
And then personally, as far as stuff, on the other side of my brain, the music side.
Sure.
We alluded to the kids CD. I'm thinking about trying to take that up. Originally, it grew out of something that I made for all my nephews. I had 5 nephews, and so I wrote songs that featured their names, and they just loved it. And they loved it so much that other people are like, "Oh, hey, could you make this for my kids?" And so I would go in and put in other kids' names. And so I'm thinking about trying to take that and advertising and getting that out there and see if there's a market for that personalized music. And then I've got a couple other music projects that will probably come up in the next year that'll be exciting to work on. One of the things I do is there's a local school that does plays. And Brett Carter, I believe you interviewed on your show.
Sure did. Previous podcast on here. Sure did.
Yeah, he's an amazingly creative person. And so sometimes I make music for his productions. And that's always a lot of fun.
Fantastic. That is great. Well, Mark, we appreciate you joining us today for the podcast. Wish we could, I know I could keep talking about it. The audio technology, and I'm just a tech geek myself, so that stuff's fascinating to me. But congratulations on your success. We look forward to keeping in touch with you, and let us know if we can ever help you in the future.
All right. Thank you so much for having me today.
And again, that was Mark Phillips from Audience. Just fantastic interview. A lot of great stuff with that interview there. It was just some really cool stuff, what they're working on. I'm really excited to hear all that technology. By the way, you might have just heard that. I've got a new little puppy in our family. This is Levi. He's just a little over 2 months old at the time of this recording. 2 weeks and a few days, but we just adopted him here from the Greater Birmingham Humane Society. He was adopted there for my family to replace a dog that we had lost. We had a family dog for 16 years, and she died recently. But Levi's here with us now, and we're happy to have little Levi. So, but thanks again to Mark for joining us today. And if there's anything that you saw on today's podcast that you'd like to know more about, check out the show notes at crossdig.com for the blog post. We'll get that information to you there as well. You can check out his website again. It's drobvious.com. And I'll have that link in the show notes as well. But just some fantastic stuff there. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of the crossdig.com podcast. We'll see you next time.